Welcome back, everybody. Derrick Soo, your 2022 write-in Oakland mayoral candidate. Well, today I'm going to talk about some historic things around the Oakland election here coming up for November 8th. And right now, we'll be receiving our voter information pamphlet, which covers all the state measures and those that are up for election. And then also we're going to have the vote here for Oakland. And Oakland is very different because in this election, as we've done in the past several elections, it is ranked choice voting. So it's not just the voting the old way that we used to have. And that's what I'm going to talk about, because back in 2006, we had a very different voting system. And it was based upon the old primaries and then the election. And so in June, we typically had a runoff so that we eliminated pretty much the entire field except for two candidates. And those would be in a runoff in November. And that's where things kind of changed, because that law changed in 2006, but it was not implemented for that particular election. But we still had a version of write-in voting that occurred that year. So let me take you back in time a little bit. This election was 2006, and so going back just before that 2006 election, in 2005, during the preliminaries and everything, we had, at that time, the mayor was Jerry Brown. And he had started a program of housing. And his campaign talked about bringing 10,000 new housing units into Oakland. And at that time, a lot of people were excited about that. And then Jerry Brown was elected, and then he was reelected. But then the problem that we have with Jerry Brown was that we found that he was a racist. Those of us that worked downtown or had communication with him and some of his rants during behind closed doors, and it was very disturbing. And the programs, a lot of programs that were for communities of color that would have really benefited were removed from the budget by then Mayor Jerry Brown. And so that created an atmosphere of hatred in the communities of color, meaning the Black and Brown and Asian communities all really got together, so to speak. They were very upset about a lot of the things that had happened and the direction that Oakland was heading. And so when Jerry Brown left office, he had termed out, just like Mayor Libby Schaaf had termed out. He was going on to become California's new AG, Attorney General. And so he was moving on anyway. And so the election process that we had, like I said earlier, it was a two election process. We have a primary that took care of that. Everybody jumped in who wanted to run for an office would get in at the top of the year, and then there would be a primary in June, and that would eliminate all the other candidates down to two people. And then those two candidates for whatever offices that they were running for, those would be your choices. And that's one of the referrals, or one of the things that I refer to as choiceless voting, and so we have to settle for, and I labeled them settle for votes. We have to settle for the lesser of two evils. And in this case, literally, when it was only down to two candidates, it was two evils. And so, like I said, ranked choice voting had just been approved here in California, but it was not implemented in this election. And so anyway, getting back to this, in 2005, like I said, Jerry Brown had already termed out, and so he couldn't run again. And so we had a field that was not desirable, so to speak, that had signed up and said that they would be running for Oakland mayor. And so out of those candidates, before we get to the story, we had the candidates. Ignacio de la Fuente, sound familiar? We had Nancy Nadell. We had Arnie Fields, Ron Osnowitz, and then we had Hector Reyna. And so, settle for voting, because there was no clear front runner at that point. Ignacio had a lot of issues because of the Oakland Police Department rider scandal, and also having to being city council president. He had signed the agreement for federal oversight, and so he wasn't well liked at that time. But in that election, he was second place. He was considered the front runner at that time. And like I said, there were a lot of issues. Also, Ignacio had some personal issues with his son, Junior, and Junior ended up in prison for raping and false imprisonment of women here in Oakland. And so those were some of the things that kind of really ended Ignacio de la Fuente's political career back then, and why he was not desirable. But he had done more for the community than the other candidates. I remember back in the day, I didn't want to vote for Ignacio, and I still don't today. And back then I voted for Nancy as my choice at that time. And like I said, ranked choice voting had not come into play yet, but it was heard by the Superior Court and Supreme Court, and it was ruled here in California it was a legal means of voting. And so that's how in the next election, which we'll cover here shortly, how that happened. And so anyway, the residents here of Oakland, the communities of color, were terribly upset that there was typically, well, what we should say, there was no person of color, meaning a black candidate, that they could get behind and support. Because Oakland, the communities of color, I myself had also said, I don't want to see another white mayor, but if we do have to have one, let's get one with the least amount of evils, trailing them. And so that's what happened up until that point. And then we get into the late spring, and people were looking at their options. They're not seeing any options that they like. And so they didn't sit back on the settle for candidates. They went out and tried to recruit retired Ron Dellums, the congressman. And he said no, he wasn't interested in being mayor. In fact, he wanted to stay retired. And yet, there were so many people that wanted a person of color, especially Ron Dellums, who had done so much for the black community, and especially here in Oakland. and represented Oakland. And so what was gathered, Ron through this whole time said no, he's not going to run, but yet there was a lot of slogans. Run, run, run was one of those slogans, because I remember those, and I remember all during the campaign, just before the vote, Ron Dellums came out and said, and many times, don't vote for me. I don't want the position. He was very adamant about it. And it was on TV, it was in print. And so I never voted for him. Why would I want to vote for a person who says, I don't want the position? And so, but yet, here's what happened to get him on the ballot. And it was a version of a write-in vote of the time. Because at the time, unless you were on the ballot, there was no provision back then for a write-in candidate. And so essentially, Ron Dellums became a protest candidate for the city of Oakland, because so many Oaklanders were protesting against another Caucasian mayor. They didn't want to see that happen. And so even with the candidates that of color that were present and running, none of them were really well liked or well supported. And so again, it comes back to settle for candidates. And Ron Dellums, he didn't put this organization together. It was you, the Oaklanders, that put together his campaign and got Ron Dellums on the ballot. There were 8,000 signatures to put Ron Dellums on the June primary. And that's how he got on there. And then not only did he get on the primary, he dominated. He literally dominated that election, because if a candidate did not get 51% of the vote, then there would be a runoff in November. But Ron Dellums received 27,647 votes, 51% of the vote. He also, because he had over 50% of the vote, and he beat that, so that there was no runoff in June. He was the mayor-elect going into 2007. That's when he officially took office. And so that was the protest vote. And even though we have a situation like back then, we do have provision for a write-in vote, and that's where I come in, because I've done a lot for the community, I've assisted the community, and I've helped our country. So there are a lot of good things. I don't want to sit here and go over the list of them, but anyway, it was really funny that there was a write-in. There were so I have to stand corrected. There was a write-in provision in 2006, because there were 122 votes for write-in, and all of those were disqualified because the candidates did not live in Oakland, and the candidates the two candidates that were on that write-in vote, one was George Bush and the other one was Homer Simpson of The Simpsons. And so those were 122 votes that were disqualified from that 2006 election. But Ron Dellums won the majority, and by 155 votes, if I remember right. But it was a very narrow margin, but there was no runoff, and he essentially took office. While he did set up some guidelines and some departments, he was a disaster for Oakland, unfortunately, and he promised Oakland nothing, and he gave Oakland nothing, sadly. But that's not me. And I only use that Ron Dellums. There's no disrespect with Ron Dellums at all. In fact, I appreciate everything he's done. He's a Oakland hero and an icon here in Oakland. But the write-in vote can drastically change an outcome, and so can ranked choice voting. And so right after the disastrous administration of Ron Dellums, we had another election in 2010. And so in 2010, ranked choice voting was the voting system that Oakland and Alameda County used. It was also known as instant runoff voting. We now call it ranked choice voting. We vote for position 1, position 2, and position 3. And it's interesting how it works. I mean, I'm not going to go into all the fine details, but Google ranked choice voting and how it works. And there's a lot of states where this is used. In fact, over 20 states, or 20 cities, I should say, use it. Some of those cities, Cambridge, Massachusetts, city of San Francisco and Oakland here in California. Berkeley uses it. San Leandro, right across the border here. Tacoma Park, Maryland. St. Paul, Minnesota. Minneapolis, Minnesota. Santa Fe, New Mexico. Las Cruces, New Mexico. Portland, Maine, and St. Louis Park, and of course, New York City. So those are cities that use ranked choice voting, or what was brought in called instant runoff voting. And like I said, it's very complicated. Just look it up. It's easier to read it and understand it from that. But Jean Quan was a long shot. I mean, she was a long shot. We had running for mayor in 2010, in that 2010 election. The front runner was Don Perata. Many of you will probably know Don Perata. Don Perata was not one of my favorite characters of the time. He was very anti-gun. And he literally passed legislation for Alameda County that said you couldn't carry a gun and you couldn't get a concealed carry weapons permit. Yet, that hypocrite had one himself. In fact, he had a concealed carry permit, and he carried a .357 Magnum. So that was one of my pet peeves with Don Perata back then, and there were many. So it's not just the single 2A issue. It went more in depth. And then we also had Terrence Candell, Arnold Fields, Greg Harlan, Marcy Hodge, Rebecca Kaplan, and Rebecca was expected to do very well, and unfortunately, she ended up finishing third, and she was eliminated in the 9th round, which gave certain votes moving up to Jean Quan, and then Jean Quan was declared the winner. Jean Quan literally went from third place, second place, to first place. And she wasn't expected to do this well out of all the people that were running for the same position. But that's what ranked choice voting does. And putting names in the second position and third position, that's very important. And the first position is important, but not as important. Second and third positions are more important because that's what keeps you in the choice, the ranked choice. The more votes you have in second and third, that keeps you, and then by staying in each additional round as they eliminate candidates, more votes come your way. And Jean Quan finished first over the front runner and favored Don Perata through ranked choice voting. So it's not unheard of for somebody who's not even on a ballot to do very well with ranked choice voting. And that's what I'm hoping for. And that's where I need your help. If you are like myself and like many others, and all you see are settle for candidates, and I have the only person that I would even consider voting for me personally would be my friend Alyssa Victory. And the rest, city council people, we're in the state of Oakland is already a mess. And they're the ones who created it and put us there. So why would we want to put any of those candidates into the top slot, knowing that they've created the biggest homeless mess, unaffordable housing? We have businesses and jobs leaving Oakland left and right. We have high crime and murder. We have illegal dumping and many other things. Why would you want to vote for somebody who has caused the increase in all of those areas? Whereas if you've been following along for the number of years, I've worked it and I've produced results. I've actually helped the community and cleaned up the community. In fact, this is one of the safest homeless sanctuary sites in all of Oakland right now. We're also getting smaller because I'm getting people into housing, and that's a great benefit. And so now we're getting down to those where some of the struggles of getting into housing are being overcome, or we're finding other avenues for those. And then those that are still remaining behind, those will be dealt with the new California CARES Act. And those characters, they're either going to accept some form of housing and go indoors and get off the streets, or they're going to go before a CARES court judge to determine whether they're mentally competent to make decisions for their life. And that's the first step. And we have folks here where I refer to them as the walking dead, because these are folks that have given up on life and all hope has gone out. I've seen it happen many times over. In fact, I've had two personal friends that actually died of that. And one of them being my friend Sleepy. He was so sad. He developed a heart condition that literally killed him. He was brokenhearted. I say that was a broken heart because he had heart failure, and that's what actually killed him here. I found his body that morning and had to report it. So I know about a lot of the different things that go on here in Oakland, but we need change. We need to do this in the right way. we need to be good stewards of the funds that are available and that become available. And I've been a good steward of all the funds that I've been granted and awarded. I've helped the community. And so I hope that you consider doing a protest, because literally a write-in vote is a protest against what is seen there on the ballot. So by writing me in, Derrick Soo, in the Oakland mayor's write-in portion, first, second, or third, is greatly appreciated and can make a difference in helping taking a person like myself who was illegitimately bounced from the ballot and disqualified, illegally with bad information. And so this is your opportunity to protest the wrongs that are being committed here in the election process of Oakland. So, again, thank you for your time, and please vote for Derrick Soo for Oakland Mayor in the write-in portion of your ranked choice voting ballot. And you should be receiving that in over the next week to 2 weeks. And please fill them out, mail them back in, and we hope that I'll see you from the mayor's office. Thanks for joining me today. We'll be right back.